Okay, so I'm recording. And yeah, first things first, let me just create my basic setup. So if I say, new file index.html, and I'm just going to put, just about anything there. So I see that I'm surprised it's not giving me the HTML5 thing. I guess I don't have that for some reason, but that's okay. We just imagine we have this, and then I say like new file, style.css, and I won't even set it up yet. First thing I want to do is just make sure that I can say hello world, remembering I should put that in a body. Seems to understand that. And then might as well make a head there, and in the head, I guess I'll have nothing right now. And I just want to see if I can actually produce this. So if I were to say live server, open with live server, that seems to work. Let me get it out of here and move it here. Let's actually move it here. Why not? I'll just move back and forth because there's a little too much to be on this one screen. So I can see hello world, which is great. And now I actually want to see that I can get CSS working. So first thing, I will do this link thing. Do I have that right? It's link, right? I guess link is self-closing, but I can just write that anyways, but I'm getting, wait, what's going on here? Why can't I?
The self-closing tag.
I guess so. Well, in React, you tend to do it like that. I think you can just write this in standard HTML. So I say like relation equals style sheet, so it knows what that is. And then is it source I want? No, it's href. Thank God for that, for the autocomplete stuff. And I just say /style, and it knows about it. And my favorite thing to see if something works, I just say like, okay, what's something on that page? H1. Okay, so I say H1, and my favorite way to know if CSS is working at all, I just say background color red, because it's in there and you will always see it. Cool, awesome. So now from here, now we have a blank canvas and we can do whatever we want. The question is, try to remember, what was that one thing that we wanted to see besides for like flexbox?
Like
Oh,
the dev tools.
right, yeah. So in terms of the dev tools, something that is super useful is just like hovering over things. So if I open this up, I have my dev console open, there's all sorts of things here. One, you can click this button here, and you could also and you can hover over stuff, and now it will actually say, you hover over something, it's saying it's highlighting the body element. You hover over this specific thing, it's highlighting the hello world element. And so that is pretty useful. And similarly, you can come from here, and if I were to say inspect, it opens the same thing. A little hard to tell if I don't have more elements going, but as you see, it highlights the thing on the right. And so that's two ways to go back and forth from the left to the right to say, where is the visual thing? Given the visual thing, what, tag is that associated with? Or inversely, given a tag, what visual thing is that associated with? Yeah, and there's other stuff here. Like if I click this, this doesn't come into play so much right now, but this is really useful. How if you're trying to make something and you expect it to be on a phone, this little button here with the laptop phone thing that actually lets you say, okay, if I'm not on a standard screen, what if I was like on an iPad Air? What are the actual dimensions? How does that affect things? And that can be a use, and then you have like the ability to scroll with a finger, and that can be a useful way to tell various things about how your app will actually look on a phone. And that is important when you get to the point of wanting things to work on multiple platforms. But I'll get rid of that too. Just we're on the internet or regular, browser, assuming some kind of laptop screen. And yeah, I have my body here, and if I look down here at styles, I'll see that my body by default says user agent style sheet. That just means you didn't write anything to overwrite it. So we just have the body over here, and this is what a body has by default for whatever reason: margin 8 pixels, display block. And then you scroll down some more and you see the box model. So we actually see, and we see, you know, the orange here reflected on the right there, even though it's hard to see because it's only 8, where my margins are 8, and that appears here. And I can even double click and change it here, where I could say like, okay, well, actually I want 16 margin there. And then you'll notice we actually, you know, this one element has this style thing added to it just to add that one. And we see it over here. Like we added specifically to that element some stuff. So if I go in here, I can do anything and I could say like, okay, 16 pixels, and maybe I want to scroll it. So I'm like scrolling right now. And then I go down here and it's reflected there, 91 pixels. And so you can really play around with stuff in here, you know, everything you might want to do in your official CSS, you can do in the dev console. But notably, if I refresh right now, that all disappears. So you want to be careful that if you, it's good to play around because often you're like, what do I actually want the CSS thing to be? Or you're trying to figure out like, you know, let's say it's flexbox. There's all these different properties something can have. And you're like, I don't know which one, just like, let me try walking through all of them. So that's definitely a way to see it. But when you find something good in your CSS, you're going to want to go back and then add it here. There's ways somewhere in here to like officially sync them, I think in sources, but you actually don't want to do that because you might make changes that you don't like. And then you're going to want to, you know, you kind of want them to be separate environments. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Dave. I've definitely been asked, I'm looking in the chat. I have definitely been asked to build a navbar multiple times. And you do it from scratch in HTML and CSS. If it's in an interview, maybe you're using React, maybe you're just using HTML and CSS. But that's something you can totally do. So how about we choose like an example website? Is there an example website that's not too complex that we can use as like a reference point for something we're trying to create?
My group was using LibriVox.
LibriVox.
RI. Yeah, it came up.
Okay, this one. Cool. Okay, yeah. So let's say we wanted to make this website. Well, the first thing I would do is I'm sort of looking at it, and I mean, we can actually inspect it if we really want. We don't necessarily want to follow exactly what they did, but we can kind of see like, okay, well, here's the body. And then we have this section that's like the header. Let's collapse that. And we see there's this next section called like the main content, and it comes right below it. And then we keep looking. There's a section here like main content, etc. And I noticed that in this one, when I scroll down, this header does not stay with me. But that's a common feature and maybe something we want to see. So let's say I'm going to try and make this. I would kind of say like, okay, top to bottom, I have a couple sections here. And, you know, first thing I want to do is just say like, okay, I have a section after a section after a section, and they're just one on top of the other. Like the main format of this is not necessarily like, you know, column, column, column. It's row, row, row. And that tells me that I want to use flexbox in that way. Of course, though, we could see here like, oh, once we get to this section, we kind of have, you know, a left and a right. And then once we're in, you know, this whole section here, whatever that is. So if I click this, maybe I go like that. So once we're in this section, it's like, you know, it's inside of it, this sort of like we have, you know, one thing after another. I guess I always get confused. Is this would be row, 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 row. And so you can just break things up that way. Everything is just a row or a column. And there is this thing called CSS grid, which is good if you know, like if I go to like the New York Times website, things that are newspapers, because of how newspapers are, they tend to know their exact grid ahead of time. And it's very grid based. So they're likely using a grid because you see how this is so much about like, it's not just left and right. They really have, you know, a grid of boxes and they're not always lined up left to right. And so CSS grid is a good way to accomplish that. Whereas you're definitely getting more, like I don't even know CSS grid too well. Flexbox gets you the most bang for your buck just thinking in like 1D. And then sometimes you just nest those 1D things in each other. So yeah, let's create this like header first. So I'm going to take out hello world. And let me just look at that again. So right, I have like, let's just, the first thing we do, we make a header and we have some kind of background color like gray. So in here, I might say something like section. And in that section, that first thing, that is our header, I guess. So I would call that LibriVox. I remember we wanted to see like a navbar, so we'll put that in there, like the equivalent of this. And then maybe there's something right under it, which looks kind of, technically that could be an H2, but I'm just going to call that an H3, free public domain audiobooks. And then to the right of it, we have this search by author, title, or reader thing. So that's like a search bar. And this is actually kind of a fancier search bar because we got like this icon here and stuff. At that point, you probably want to be using like Bootstrap or something which just gives you that stuff because that gets more complicated over time. And by the time we get to React, we'll see that, people make component libraries. So these things are kind of built in. But for now, I'll just make a search box. So I'll just say like, what would a search bar input, right? And I see input is self-closing. And if I say type is search one of them, yes. So I'm going to save that and go here. And it's not going to look right. Let me do these side to side, which often means you have to close that. Oh, and notice too, sometimes it's easier when the thing is on the right, but if you don't have enough room, you can click here and you can actually choose where you dock it. So you can pop it out entirely, but usually you're going to want to say, okay, if it's on the right, that's going to be useful if I don't care about having all my space left to right, but maybe I want it on the bottom. And then that's the more useful approach. And there's really a lot here, so it can be hard to see everything. One thing I did want to say, if we look at that H1 with the LibriVox, so let's say I go into that, I go into the body, I go into that first section, I go into LibriVox. I see I have this like background color red here, right? Well, something to notice is that if I keep scrolling down, I'll see like, okay, well, H1 already has some stuff defined, and some of it's still there. Like display block, it's saying that's still there, but some of it's been crossed out because it's been overridden by whatever this WebKit anything, which is again like something Chrome is providing itself. So anything that matches this will have these values, and then my thing finally overwrites it for background color. But these are just sort of the defined styles. If I look at computed, I'm actually going to see every single CSS style thing, like the key value pair for every single element. It's just that there's so much, and the great majority of them are just set to none or some other sensible default because it doesn't matter for this one, that they don't want to show you all of it. But every single CSS element, every single HTML element has every one of these things in there. It's just, why mention text emphasis color, whatever that is, if it's going to be set to 000. I mean, I'm assuming this means black, but then that it's also probably like transparent or something. So we're just not even seeing that at all. Okay, so when I look at this, I see it doesn't quite look how I want it to here. So then you can just start messing with it where you click here and you see you already have this H1 thing defined, and that's because I defined it here. So maybe the first thing I want to say is, well, actually this section up here, I know it's going to have a certain size and I want to give it a background color. So I'll actually go back here and I'll say something like, maybe I don't really like using IDs too much. I like using classes because you never know if you're going to want to reuse something. So I'll just say that the class for this one will be like header. How about that? I'm pretty sure I could have even just done header like that. Maybe that's the better way. Actually will, I guess. So I'm actually going to call this a header. That's what it is to me. And in that case, I don't have to do it like a class. I just say, okay, header. And we'll get rid of that for now. And then what am I going to do with the header? I'm going to say background color. And often you'll be using a hex thing, which looks like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. And who knows what color that is, some kind of, oh, and they let you like pick it. So I could pick a color like that. And in the real world, people will, a designer on your team will give you like, ideally you're using something like Figma, and they're telling you the exact color for everything, the exact width and this and that. But for this, I'm just going to say gray, because that's a way to start seeing something. And there it is. And now I could set like the width and the height. But I don't really want to set the width, because I kind of want to see like, does this website work? The bigger or smaller it gets. I want it to be somewhat responsive, and HTML is responsive by default. So if I were to say like height and width, maybe here I could start playing around with it. I say like height. There's always things like fit content. But I'm going to be explicit. I'm going to say, no, this is going to be 400 pixels or maybe more. Why is this not getting, oh, because I'm doing it for the body. Oops. Let's reload that. So if I go in that header, for this entire header, I might say my height. If I just go up and down, I'll see that some things change sometimes, like WebKit fill available. That would mean the whole page. Gets a little hard to see at a point. Maybe I really should just look at this for the most part. Yeah, so when we're looking through this, if I say height, I can see how like a lot of these end up being the same. This one is the whole page, but I'm going to say like, okay, 400 pixels. People like different units, but I'm just going to go with pixels. And then from there, I can actually like go up and down on this if I want to see like what makes sense to me. So I'll say like, okay, well, that kind of works for me. I'll do that. So maybe I decided like, okay, I'm going 255 pixels for this. Some people really like doing things that are like units of 8. So I'll say I'm going 264 pixels for this. So I'll add that in here. I'll say height, 264 pixels, and that's always what it's going to be. You might have noticed that when I said height, there were things like min height, max height, and that's a way of saying like it's never going to go below this or it's never going to go above this, but that's accounting for the fact that things grow and shrink. But I'm going to say no, this is always 264 pixels. And notice that, the width actually changes as I move. The width of that box is getting greater or smaller. Whereas if I added the width in there, let's say I say, well, I want the width to be like double that. So like 5, not 12, 520, I don't know. So now it looks like that. And now it's not really responding to me. And so it might be best to just leave it off and keep the fact that, okay, it's going to take up the whole page. And that looks sort of like this one. And then maybe I want to center things. And I want them to be left to right in this way. So now looking here, I sort of break it down and I say like, okay, well, first I have this whole big box of stuff and I want to center all the content. So to me, that would look like, okay, let me make a flexbox for the content here. And it's going to be columns because there's a left column and a right column. That's kind of the top level thing. Or sorry, no, that's rows. I always get confused. So right? Yeah, I have a row to the left and then a row to the right. And then from there, I could like center all that stuff. So what I'll do here is I'll say, okay, here's my header. Well, my header itself can be this like container. So I'll say display flex, and that's not going to do any, no, it did something. Seems to, like if I look in here at the header now, I'll see that I have like display flex, and you could actually click this and they have some pretty good stuff here now. So there actually are things that are already chosen for me, like row, but now if I say column, then they're like, top to bottom. But I think I actually do want row. It's just that I want both of these two things to be in one row and this thing to be in the other row, because that would match kind of how this works. And there's like a big gap in between. So then I'd go back here and I'd say like, maybe I would call this one, I could just add a div in there just to say, well, there's really just two things in here. I don't even have to call it anything yet. And then same with this one. There's going to be, I guess I don't explicitly need a div for that. It's just the second thing. So I'll save that and I'll come back. So how's this working now? So I have my flex direction is my row. These two are together, and then this one's right next to it. But they're right next to each other, and that's because they're kind of putting them in this order where it's saying like, okay, well, this was the first one, this was the second one, even though it looks kind of crazy now. And there's just room for more things. But if we look here, it's like we kind of want them separated from each other. And it's sort of like we have this thing where we want to pull them apart. And we want, the nice thing about flexbox is that like, while I'm doing this right now, that's not changing, but if I want to pull them apart, I want them to stay pulled apart in sort of a reasonable way, even as the dimensions of the page change, because you never know what device someone's going to look at it on. So I can look at that here, and because I have this nice thing, it looks like what I want is justified content. So I could say like, okay, well, right now they're everything's justified to the center, or everything's to the left, or everything's to the right. But I think I kind of want, and in this case, space between, I'm pulling them as far apart as I can. I think I want something like this, space around or space evenly. So space around saying, I'm going to pull them apart, but there's going to be these like gaps to the left and the right. And then I also wanted to do something where things were kind of in the center. So if I start messing with this stuff, I don't think this is going to do it because this is align content. I think I want align items. I don't totally know the difference. But okay, that's stretch, that's baseline, that's center. Okay. So now I'm getting closer there where I kind of have like something to the left, something to the right. And I'm pretty sure I can control how big this gap to the left and right is. But it looks like those two things are what I wanted to add, and they've been added here. So I can just say like, why is that one grayed out? I think the flex wrap, no wrap. Okay. I'm just going to add justify content and align content to here. So justify content, and I think the one we chose was space around. And then align content, the one we chose was center. And then once you do that, always good to refresh and see how it worked. I'm a little confused what's going on with like why, maybe it wasn't align content center. I wanted align item center, right? Okay. So that one is align item center. And so now it's looking more or less like I want it to. I could always make adjustments where I say how big something is, but let me kind of look through this. So if I see here, I have this header, and I'm trying to understand, like if I go to the header, it's not, I don't really know exactly what those different spaces mean, but I would love to control how big that space to the left and right is. And I'm not sure that I can do that with justify content, because justify content is going to adjust as best as it can. So those get bigger or smaller. So something I might do instead is, instead of space around, I could say something like space between. And now they're all the way to the left and the right. But then if I look at this, I say like, well, I do want some, margin there, or padding actually. So margin would be, if I did margin, and maybe I always forget exactly what it is. Like there's shortcuts where I could say, like if I say 10 pixels, that's up, down, left, and right. But if I say something like 10 pixels, 12 pixels, it'll decide, well, the first one means top and bottom, the second one means left and right. And that can be kind of nice. And you could also always say all four. But so then I can say something like, okay, well, I don't care about left and right. Or sorry, I don't care about top and bottom, but I do care about left and right. But you see, that's not really what I want. I don't want to push it away from the main content. I actually want padding there. And padding is going to say that whole box is still gray. Do I have that right? No, wait, because that's the header. is the whole box gray? It's a little confusing to me. If I take that out, yeah, no, the whole box is gray, and padding is just telling us how far that is. So I could say like, oh, I want it in that much. So let me say, I'll say padding 28 pixels. And then justify content, we change from space around to space between, and we reload it, and it looks how we want it to. And this is more or less what we wanted there. It obviously doesn't look too great. Gonna look at the chat quickly. This only looks easy because I've done this so many, when I got my first job out of college, I didn't know any JavaScript, any HTML, CSS, any of it. I just knew like data structures and algorithms. What we did for that 1 week, I did for 4 years. And it's enough to pass the interview, and then you get your first job and they're like, learn some actual things. And so you just kind of learn it over time. But if you do something like getting the job is its own thing, but once you have the job, you tend to get pigeonholed relatively fast, and people want you to do the same thing over and over again. And it is like the first time you have to center a div, you're like, what is this? But you center a lot of divs. You change the background color a lot of times, and you just end up having these 10 or 15 patterns that you do over and over again. So it becomes second nature. But it's good. You can tell me that if I'm going too quick, because as you see, like at a certain point, you can just kind of think in it. You're not really trying to say like, well, which one does that? But you just kind of learn over time, and this using the dev console is a big part of it. Because it shows you things. Okay, so someone mentioned having like a navbar. Let's just say now we want to add a navbar to this top of this page. So maybe above the header, I actually have a nav. Cool. And maybe in that nav, I have like a UL, because it is an unordered list. Maybe, initially it's going to give me those bullet points, but as we'll see, it doesn't, like when we're working with HTML, we don't want to think too much about like, oh, this is how it looks by default, because we can use CSS to take those bullets out or change things about them. But what we are saying is a navbar has a bunch of navbar elements. Well, that's a list of things, and it's an unordered list. It doesn't make sense to say 1, 2, 3, 4. Guess it does. The order sort of matters, but I'm going to just say like, okay, I have a bunch of things, and I'll put them in LIs, and maybe it would be like home, and it would be about, what is another common thing like this? Contact us, careers, who knows? So that's enough things. And then I look back here and I have these 4. Okay, that's not quite what we want. So at that point, we would say like, yeah, well, this is probably another flexbox thing. So first thing I might do, I would say, okay, that whole navbar, well, the whole navbar has a UL in it. So it's not really like I want flex to apply to the navbar. And maybe I could even see that here. Like if I said display flex, and then I said flex direction, column, row, well, it already is this left to right row. So that's the default anyways. But the thing is, there's only one thing in there, the UL. So that's not exactly what we want. We really want to target that UL and do it there. So let's just say we didn't have those there. But in the UL, if I said, okay, well, this is actually display flex, and well, it already did it. It looks a little funny, but that is my flex direction row. And maybe this is a good time. Yeah, we'll learn about like gap. So I'll do that first. I'll come back to my style.css, and I have the nav bar, right? But I actually don't want to target the nav. I want to target the UL in the nav. So I say like nav space UL, and you can always just give things names because then it's easier. This is going to apply to every UL and every nav. And what does that mean? Like I'm not going to have another one, but if I did, do I want it to apply to both of them? Maybe not. This is another good thing in Visual Studio Code. If you hover over this, it's complaining right now because I haven't put anything in this rule set, but actually it's telling me like what I said here is a nav, and then at any level, it has a child called a UL, and this selector specificity thing can sometimes matter. I don't really know how to read it. if I clicked on it, I could read more about it. But it's basically trying to tell you there's rules around when one selector gets chosen over another, and this has a certain level. Whereas if I look at this one, it's 0, 0, 1. It's probably saying that if there was a conflict between this one and this one, I think the more specific one would override it. So navul would take over if there was ever a conflict there for some reason. That something was both a header and a navul, though that doesn't make sense. Okay, so for this one, again, display flex, and by default, it's going to be a row, and that is what it is. And now I see things are sort of like, let me just refresh, move this up or down. So when I'm in this UL here, things are kind of all right on top of each other. Well, there's other things in Flex, and one thing I really like is Flex Gap. Maybe it's just called Gap. Yeah, Gap. And Gap will be both column and row by default, but you can specify if they're different. But if I say here Gap like 10 pixels, now it's going to start pulling those elements apart. So maybe I would do that. I would say Gap 36 pixels, and I can hover over that and see that's the amount of space between each one of these. So I'm going to say Gap 36 pixels. Okay. And then from there, maybe I would say like, well, I don't really want those dots. That's not really what I'm used to for a nav bar. So if I look at this UL, I would see like, okay, there's, in terms of the user agent style sheet, the stuff that's predefined, there's this thing called list style type disk. And so that's, maybe a hint to me, like that's something I might care about, list style type. And I can look through it and I can see like, I can go up and down. Okay, this is what it is by default. And then circles, and there's just like different things I might care about. But of course, one of them is generally for everything in CSS, none. And then I can say, okay, none, that's what I want. So now I don't have anything like that. And if I keep looking at this UL, I see like, there's that green thing here. So it looks like there's some padding built in. Maybe I don't really want that. Or maybe I want it to be the same padding as, for the other thing over here. So I want like these two to line up. So then I'd go back here and I'd say, well, I had a padding of 28 pixels for that. So I'll say same thing here, but I don't want it necessarily top and bottom. I really just want it, maybe I do actually, but I could just say something like padding left. So there's always stuff like that where you can be as specific as you want. And now that padding for this one, it only applies here. Oh, and I didn't save that list. So you see it reverted back. So now I'm going to add this, but say none. Okay, so now they're like starting to line up. But why aren't those lined up? So if I look at like the nav, okay, and then that's 28 pixels from the left. And then if I look at the header, the padding is also 28 pixels from the left, but they don't quite line up. I'm not positive why. Or do those line up? Maybe it's just a visual trick that I don't see them as lining up. Thanks, Bennett, for those specificities.
Probably just because the capital L in LibriVox, only the very top and very bottom of the L is touching the sides, so it just looks like it's further to the right than it is.
Yeah, I like the trance music. I'm pretty sure there's a way to, maybe it's not built in, but there's definitely things you can download that kind of like put a grid over everything if you want to be like pixel perfect. Then you could actually measure. But yeah, let's say I think this is good. So I have like my home, my about, my contact us, careers. I like that. I like where they are. At this point, I might say like, well, actually, let's say I had, a bunch more things on this page. So let me just make a big, another additional, after the header, I'm going to have like section. And I'll call this section, I'll say like, I guess ID equals main content. And I'm doing that just because I want to create more space. Like I want to have a bunch of stuff on here. So this is another good thing that's built in. If I start typing lorem, this is a thing that people use in typesetting a lot. So I start typing lorem, I hit tab. It's going to give me this big Latin line. And I don't know what it means, but it has all the letters in it, I think. And that's why it's good for typesetting. You're just seeing like, does this look right? So I look here now, and this is what that looks like. Doesn't really matter. I could copy paste that a bunch of times, but what I really want to do is come back here and I say, okay, main content, let me make one of those. And now that I've made it, I'm going to just explicitly say like its height is like, 8,000 pixels, because without this, I'm not going to get like scrolling behavior. And I want to see that right now. And then to make it actually look a certain way, so I know, I'll say background color like aqua or something. So now I go back here, I have this aqua thing, and I actually have a lot to scroll to. And the reason I care about that is that I actually want to see that top part scrolling, because that's how a lot of nav bars work. So maybe I'd look at that, the whole nav bar. And then in the nav bar, that's where I might start saying like position. And then I can do position absolute, it disappears for some reason, fixed, inherit, initial, there's all types, but I think what I want to do is sticky. And now that I do sticky, nope, sticky means it's actually going to stick there. So which one do I want? I want static, and then it's always going to be in that spot. Is that right? No, which one is
I
it?
think it's fixed.
It's fixed. Okay. So it's easy to forget these things. There's a lot of them, but you can, okay, but then, oh no, it is there, right? And that's why, now that I made it fixed, that's why I probably want to say like, well, actually this thing here has its own background color, and I'll make that white, let's say. Oh, but I see it's not even all the way left to right. Why is that? It is display block. I'm surprised. Why does it have this insane, wait, why is that? I did that. I guess because it's just wrapping its content. And if I said something like with, instead of saying fit content, I could say something like fill available. I'm surprised, is there max content? That's nope, not max content. I guess WebKit fill available. I never understand with this dash WebKit. I think that when it has dash WebKit in front, I think that means this is still in the process. Not every browser supports it. It's not officially in CSS, but Chrome will support it, Firefox will support it, Safari will support it. So it's just like getting a feature a little early. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to use WebKit fill available. And I guess I'll just copy all of this, which I want to put in the nav itself. So that was my nav UL, but then I could just say, well, what about just nav? I have these, and this one, only refers to the UL within the nav, whereas this one refers to the nav in general. And then something in here would overwrite something, like something that everything in here is going to apply to anything inside of it. But if you
Did you set the width to 100 view width, like VW?
Oh, yeah, that's probably what we want. That's a really good point. Right, so that should work too, just saying 100% of the page, and that's going to adapt when I go left and right. And that's all I really wanted. And of course, you can see when you get really little, it doesn't work. But, your phone's probably not going to be smaller than this. We could actually see that and say like, okay, what's like the oldest or the smallest iPhone? Like iPhone SE? Probably not. Whatever it is, like that still looks good enough. We can, zoom in if we want to see it a little better. But yeah, we're not too worried about these really small sizes. Okay, so now that sticks with us as we go. I kind of see how there's some space there because my whole body has a margin. So maybe I want to go in there and take that out. In that case, I would. And with CSS, you can get so specific about this stuff. But I'm going to go in here and say the body, because some people really want pixel perfect. So now I took that out. Now my body has a margin of 0. Now when I scroll, that really stays at the top. And what else? Something you would often see in a nav bar is like, let's say when I click on this, that's now, been clicked on, and that would be highlighted in some way. I can't really show that without JavaScript in terms of clicking on a specific one, but I can show how you might set one as active and then have a style for that. So let's say someone was on the contact us page, and when you clicked on that, it was informed, okay, we're going to add the style active to this. So what I might have is something like, first I could go in here and I would say like, okay, well, because of JavaScript, we're going to change which class has like the active link, or which one of these elements has the active link class on it. And using JavaScript, we would take, add it or remove it for a specific element. We're going to say this one has the active link class. And if I go back here, there's no real difference. But if I inspect that specific element, I'll see it has active link there. And now I could change what is in active link. So maybe I would say like, oh, well, for this element, we would want to have like a border and it'll be like 1 pixel and it would be maybe also aqua because we got a theme here, but it's not going to show it until I say like dotted or something. And I can see that doesn't, I can barely see it. So maybe I want to hover over this. Ooh, I like that. So something like that. And now I can already see like I'm kind of pushing the others away. So it's almost like I want them all to have like, maybe I'm getting too complicated with it, but it's almost like I want all of them. If they're inactive, if they're active or inactive, they're going to have like this border. And then maybe I would just use JavaScript to decide, oh, well, if one of them is active, I actually make that a certain color. So let's actually do that. I'm going to say they all have a 6 pixel aqua background, but what if what if it wasn't dotted, but what are the options? Like none. Okay. So what if I did that? So I'm going to say, okay, how about all of them? Every single LI by default, I'm going to say nav ul, and then here I can say nav ul li. You might start to think like this is annoying. Like I'm saying something for nav, then for nav ul, and for nav ul li. There's eventually this thing called SCSS or SAS. The website for it would be SAS. And that's basically just like it turns into CSS ultimately, but it lets you nest things, and it also gives you other things like variables, like things you might want that are more programming languagey. But now instead of saying like nav ul, you can say nav and then right under it ul and then nav under it li. So there's cool things like that, but we don't have that with default HTML CSS. So really, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, okay, for each one of these things, I'm going to say border, and that border is going to look like, what did I say? It was like, let's just say 4 pixels, aqua, and then what's its style? Well, I'm going to say not like I could say dotted, and then every one of them has it except that one, even though that one's an LI. Why is it I guess because active link overrides it. Yeah. But if I were to take that out, every one of them has it. And I could always say like maybe I actually want like for each one of those to have some padding, push the inner content away from the outer content, or from the border rather. So I'll add some padding in there. But yeah, that's for each one of these. But I actually don't want it for all of them. I only want it for the active one. So I'm going to put that active thing back. And now if I look here, well, it's not, the active thing, or no, it seems to be working for all of them, but there is no active link yet. So that was active link, right? I made that a class. Yep. And actually, I'm going to make this one none. So they all have border 4 pixels, aqua, none. And you'll see here it's saying like line width, line style, color. But I'm just saying like, okay, this is what it is by default, and you see nothing. But now I could say, okay, for that active link, I want to say it's all the same. So they're always going to line up. But if it's an active link, then I'm going to say border, what was it? Style. Okay, that one I want to look a certain way. Ooh, I kind of like that inset. Okay, very 90s. Border style. So when you have something like border and it has multiple things in it, that's usually just a shorthand for the fact that you could have defined that with multiple different things, but you want to do them all at once. So this one I liked inset. And even though I'm not using JavaScript, like if I was using JavaScript, I would be able to make it so every time I clicked on a different one of these, it would apply, it would remove that class from the one it's currently on and move it to the class I just clicked on. But this is basically what I want, and you'll see that everything is lining up because they all have that border. It's just that only one of them has this like, border style set to something other than none. So yeah, that's how you might do a navbar. I see the chat grew kind of long, so let me read it now. Yeah, I don't think, does anyone know what lorem ipsum means? I'm sure there's one person who knows.
So
Good.
it's from Cicero, and it's just there was a typesetter, I think a 15th century typesetter who just kind of pulled out some gibberish words. But I think the idea is that it has similar consonant and vowel content to English, but otherwise it's not really translatable. It's just kind of Latin words.
Like dummy text is what I heard it's called.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I'm looking in the chat here and I see a couple things. First, what the hell is WebKit? Yeah, I don't fully know myself, but I'm pretty sure WebKit, you see it a lot. I think what it means is, this is something that like, so WebKit is an actual open source web browser. And I think they are always pushing kind of the next, new features in CSS or JavaScript or whatever it is, but those aren't always supported by every browser. And so if I said like, what was that one we were looking at? It was like WebKit full width for one of these for looking at the length of something, right? Which was the one we were looking at for the nav, right? So for width, if I take that away, one of the things here was WebKit fill available. And we found a way to do it without it. But if I said like WebKit full available width, this might be my answer. So basically, as far as I know, it's just things that start with -WebKit means these aren't necessarily supported on every browser yet. And so if I looked at like specifically WebKit full available with, and I said browser support, I'm sure somewhere I could find something saying, some things have it and some things don't. Right. So you'll often see things like this, and no one has the time to read this stuff, but it's saying like, okay, well, this, whatever it is we care about, like it's supported on some browsers and not others. And so, okay, it's supported in Chrome on every version from 22 onwards, but if someone's on a really old version of Chrome that was released in 2010, no, it's not supported. And so it's really just a matter of how backwards compatible do you think you want it to be. And if something doesn't have -WebKit on there, you can be more or less guaranteed that's going to work on really old browsers too. But you just never know. Like most, like I often use this Brave browser thing, and you'd be surprised how how many big websites just don't work on it because everyone's testing everything on Chrome. And at this point, modern like Microsoft Edge is also Chrome. Firefox is very similar to Chrome. It's only Safari that really does its own thing. But then people can use anything. Some person is like a Kai OS, that's their thing. They love Kai OS. They'll never use another browser. Well, you could design things for them if you really care about compatibility with everybody, but that often doesn't happen. And if you get into the details of this stuff, it can get very complex, but you generally don't have to worry about it, especially if you're prototyping something, and only then you might try and figure out like how many, what your platforms are trying to hit are, and how many people you might be leaving behind if you don't support like, some really old browser or something. Okay, so if I keep looking this up, Noah's saying wait, CSS doesn't have variables. Yeah, that's a important point to make, which is HTML and CSS are not actual programming languages. They count as markup languages. And the difference there is that a programming language can represent data, and it can also perform, like it can execute data, and that is a computation. So in a markup language, we cannot do both of those. We can only represent data. So if we look at index.html or styles.css, we're just saying like, this is data, this is what this is, but we're not saying like, do something. There's no state happening. So we can't actually say like, you know, var x equals center, and then later say x. And we certainly can't change it later and then say, well, now x equals, you know, 42, and then we like put that in here or something. But I think there actually are built-in variables to CSS now, even though they came to Sass first, because Sass just turns into CSS. CSS now has some version of variables, so we can see that. Right, we have this var function. So let's see how to use it. Yeah, okay, so I can actually set things. So first I use this, you know, colon root thing, which is like a pseudo selector. Don't fully understand that, but I can use this to define certain things. So maybe up here I would say, okay, well, I have certain things up here. And what are those things? Well, I notice I use 28 a lot, and I use like 4 a lot. So maybe I would want to say something like, you know, default padding. And I think this dash dash means, oh, we're gonna, that means it's a variable. So maybe I'll say like default padding 28 pixels, and then I'll say like button padding, and I'll use it in both places. So I'll say button padding 4 pixels. And now I don't have to write those things everywhere. I know about them. And then according to this, the way I reference it is I can, there's this like function I have built in here called var, and then I can put, you know, one of these things in the root in it. So I think what I would do then is I go here and I say, okay, well, I don't want to say 28 pixels there. I'll say var, and what was it? Dash dash default padding. And then I use that in the same other place I do the 28. And then for these, it was var button padding. So that was like var button padding, and same with this. And now nothing should have changed, but I'm using variables now. Looks like something definitely did change. What happened there? Something does not like something.
You left that one property set to X. I think it was align items.
What was it originally? Center. Okay, well, that explains it. No, it wasn't center, was it? Align. Oh, and or it wasn't center like that. Yeah, I'm getting confused. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Good catch. But the cool thing about variables is that now, like if I look here, well, I have that default padding 28 pixels. If I wanted to change that, so if I'm going to change it like this, it's actually changing the default padding in all the places it's referenced. And so that's, you know, the main benefit of a variable. So unlike in like JavaScript or Python, I can't set the variable and then later update it. It's going to apply everywhere, but it at least keeps me from having to rewrite stuff. Yep. Cool. So I see it's 4 p.m. already. We probably have stand down, or 4 p.m. my time. So we can end this, and I'll put it on the internet. I hope this was useful. If you guys want to do more of these, just let me know. But yeah, we should do more of these because, you know, this is good use. People seem to show up to them. So I want to stop sharing. I guess I can also stop recording.